Hey guys, this is Connor here with Patriotfabanddesign. I wanted to do a video on re-welding the Vz-61 Skorpion. This is the original Skorpion from the Czech Republic. A lot of these get imported into the country. This is my semi-auto SBR that I made a few years ago. And I actually make a jig for re-welding these receivers back together in a semi-auto configuration. Or in full auto if you're a 07, 02 FFL looking for a full auto build. So what we have today is a torch cut receiver, how you would get it from one of the importers. And this one is a bit interesting. You know, the torch cuts actually go through a couple of the key hole locations, as well as one of the fixing plate locations, which we'll get to. So it's a relatively difficult receiver to re-weld. This is an example of the jigs that I sell. So the jigs come with a Magwell block, and then the jig is bolted together on both sides, and all these screw locations actually go through and line up with the hole locations on the receiver. So today we're going to be showing you how to start that process. I'll probably come back with a separate video on finishing the weld off. But today's video is just going to be getting all the pieces aligned in the jig, tack welded together, showing you what needs to be done to make a semi-auto version of the Vz-61 in a pistol configuration. So what you're going to need to do this is obviously the jig. And I don't have a website yet, so if you want to purchase a jig, you're going to just have to reach out to me at patriotfabanddesign@yahoo.com, and I'll put that email in the comments below, or in the description below. Obviously, you'll need a parts kit, and I've got Vz-61 parts kits all over the place right now, but you'll need all 4 of these receiver sections. So Bowman, Numich, there's a third one that I'm forgetting right now that come with all of the receiver pieces. If you buy a parts kit from Royal Tiger Imports or Atlantic Firearms, they are not going to come with this middle section of the receiver. They're going to come with the front 2 Magwell sections and then the rear stub. Atlantic, one of my first kits was from Atlantic, and they did used to come with all 4 pieces, but as far as I know, they do not anymore. So all of my receivers and parts kits have been coming from Bowman lately, and everything has been re-weldable. I've been able to salvage all the receiver pieces. I'm not cutting up one receiver or cutting up 2 receivers to make one receiver. I'm actually able to salvage every receiver section that I've got. And that's mostly because of the copper pin upgrade that I've added to the kits recently. It's a $10 upgrade. Basically, every kit, all my jigs come with extra hardware, and they come with 3 copper pins. And these copper pins can actually be used in the jig to re-weld and recreate your holes that might be missing from the torch cutting process. And the receiver that we're welding today, I guess I'll give you a close-up. So there's 2 parts of the receiver that accept the fixing plate, which is this piece right here. And fixing plates, I've seen 2 different sizes. So one comes with a little tang. This tang goes into the trigger guard area. And then this is kind of what I considered a small fixing plate. So there's a small fixing plate and there's a large fixing plate. And what this, the jig actually allows you to use the fixing plate while you're re-welding, but unfortunately for this torch cut receiver, one of the torch cuts intersects where the fixing plate actually mounts to the housing. So it's still re-weldable. If you wanted to weld this receiver back up and recreate that slot that this fixing plate goes into, you would need a key seat end mill, which allows you to make a groove that this would actually sit into. I don't have a key seat end mill. I tend to not really worry about this too much. When we re-weld this receiver back together, what we will actually end up with is a receiver that kind of looks like that, where it sits into the original groove on the top, and then I have machined a slot on the receiver where the torch cut on this one went right through the middle of this one as well. And I didn't worry about it too much. My thought was that, you know, I could put a little bit of JB Weld or epoxy there to keep this in place, but it's firm. This fixing plate does not move. So basically when the torch cut intersects that location, yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer. It's not a game changer per se, but it is a bummer when that does happen. Like I said, we're gonna re-weld one today, and we're gonna take another look at, you know, what needs to be done to this specific receiver to make it work. Now, one key benefit too, before I get into welding, is this jig actually does allow you to use the fixing plate to set the spacing of those two center sections. So if I grab another receiver that I'm working on and just drop it in the jig, I'm not going to screw it all together, but we'll place the fixing plate in there. Oh, this one's got some slag on it. One sec. That's one good thing about loving the Vz-61 is I've got multiple Skorpion projects in the works right now. Now I've got some slag and some welds I have not cleaned up on this receiver yet. But there is a notch cut out on the jig right here that actually allows you to use the fixing plate in the jig, and it's not going to bolt all together because this receiver hasn't been cleaned up on the outside yet. While I have this receiver, this is going to be the first thing that we weld. This is where the full auto slot normally would be. This is the first thing that you have to convert to in order to make a semi-auto build. Welding this slot closed does not allow you to have that sear in your trigger pack at all. So that's what we're going to be welding first. With that, let's get into this a little bit. Now I'm MIG welding these receiver sections back together. I've had a lot of questions about guys TIG welding these and what filler to use. To be honest, I don't know what's best. I'm not a TIG welder. I don't own a TIG welder. It's personal preference. You know, some guys are much more comfortable using TIG, and I haven't gotten into that. So I MIG weld these. I use 25 thou solid core wire and 75-25 mix on gas. I've got a 220 Lincoln right there. You know, a 120 is probably fine for this. I keep the voltage pretty low. Like I have the voltage on the A setting and then my feeds on 3. So, I mean, you know, you could probably get away with, you know, a 110 welder, MIG, to do this project, just because it's really important not to overheat these parts. Some of the wall thicknesses on these receiver sections are really thin. All right, so here is that middle section. There's the slot for the full auto sear. This is what we're gonna be welding together first if you are building a semi-auto Vz-61. Should have turned my gas on. So I did not have my gas on when I started welding. I opened the tank, but then not the regulator. So the first little bit looks a little like poop, but that slot is closed and we're gonna go in and we're gonna clean that up. Now, I really like using my vertical mill. So I've got a mill here. It's a mill lathe combo, just a bench mill. I like using those for cleaning this up. Just for today's video, you know, I'm going to try to minimize using the mill because I understand that a lot of people don't have a mill or access to one. So I'm going to clean this up with a grinder real quick and make that flat because that weld will interfere with the bolt if it's not ground down to the same point that it was before. So we've got that ground down. If we need to take that down more later, I will. But for now, that slot is closed. So now, I'm actually going to show you guys a little trick that I like to use for starting the re-weld process. And it's going to be starting with the 2 front Magwell sections. So I've already got this front Magwell section just in a upper receiver. And I'm going to use that front locating pin to locate the front section. And I'm going to take my Magwell block, which I put somewhere. I'm going to take my Magwell block. Okay, all the kits come with these Magwell blocks. I'm going to put it in here. And I'm going to stick this back section on here. And this is, the Magwell block is dual purpose, okay? So the Magwell block sets the spacing, but it also acts as a backing plate for welding. So it's not gonna stick to it. Now you do have to hammer the Magwell block out, generally speaking, just because of shrinkage. But this is how we're gonna start. And just from experience, I used a C-clamp once or twice before to actually hold this all together like this. And because these upper receivers are just sheet metal, they don't really like to be clamped. So I've learned that just holding all of these pieces firmly together, and it's a little bit of a cluster to hold all these pieces together. But once you get it right, just put some pressure on the back on your thumb right here, pushing all these pieces together, and get it tack welded. And just make sure that your receiver is bottomed out. You know, you want that front section to be butted up against your upper receiver on both sides. Just make sure. And tack it. All right, so this is what we've got. Okay, our two pieces are tacked together. Okay, and that Magwell block's gonna be stuck in there. So I'm gonna go off camera real quick and get that block out. And if you don't have a really small punch, I believe this is a 1/16 punch, you're going to want one of these for pressing down on that pin for your upper receiver. It comes in handy too for later on in the build, but just when it's going in and out of the upper receiver real quick, one of these is really handy. All right, so we've got our mag block punched out. Just quick hammer. No big deal there. And there's some slag on the inside of this Magwell. Let's go ahead and see if a mag fits in. Okay, fits in pretty snug. But that's kind of what you want. You kind of want it to be a little snug. You can always remove material later, but that's what it looks like. Now, let me tell you something real quick about the Magwell blocks. So I have a Southern Tactical Vz-61 pistol that I bought. Let me just grab that. So I am not shitting on the Vz-61 from Southern Tactical at all. I think, you know, this pistol's great. It works. You know, I think they went out on a limb to bring to market a lower receiver and a full build that is, you know, feeding demand. I think, you know, this pistol has a lot of demand right now. And part of that is because a lot of the parts kits are really affordable right now, you know, and I'm a lover for the Vz-61. I think it's just an awesome, fun, you know, pistol. If you end up SBRing it, it's just such an awesome, cool, you know, sidearm or secondary, you know. But let me show you something real quick with the Southern Tactical. So here's my unloaded mag. Can you see that little bit of play that's in the Magwell? So that can actually, if the mag's all the way pushed back, like say you're holding it like this to shoot it, that can actually cause your rounds to hit the feed ramp prematurely and not feed. Now, if you're not holding the mag, if you're just holding it like this, it feeds just fine. If you're holding it out, like you're actually pulling the mag forward, then it feeds just fine. But when I design these Magwell blocks, I actually designed them to be just a hair smaller so that you had a tighter magazine well. So if we take some calipers and we measure the Magwell, let's see, I'm getting about 1.175. Okay, remember that, 1.175. These magazines are 1.150. So 25 thou of play is what contributes to that play in the magazine well. Now, if I take one of the lower receivers that I have welded back together, I'm looking at 1.160. So 15 thou difference in the Magwells that I've re-welded back together that function perfectly. And the Vz-61 from Southern Tactical is 15 thou bigger. Now here's the difference. So here's my Magwell. A little bit of play, drops free, goes in, inserts just fine. That's kind of what you want. At least that's what I want. You know, with these jigs that I'm selling, that's what I'm selling is a tighter Magwell block than what Southern Tactical has created to help avoid some of those issues with feeding. Now there's some variants, like this was the first, this is my SBR. This is the first one I ever built, and let's measure it. We're clear. This one is 1174. So maybe a little bit smaller. The stock's getting in the way. Yeah, 1171. So it can work. I mean, that gun has no feeding issues either, and I re-welded it, and it has a larger Magwell. You know, the 1.171 is pretty damn close to the Southern Tactical Magwell. And you know, this one has a little bit of play as well. Very, very similar to the Southern Tactical play, but if it's a known issue that the Magwell spacing can cause feeding issues, then the Magwell block that I'm going to sell is going to be a tighter fit. Now, if you wanted a looser fit, you know, there's ways around that too. You could take the Magwell block and you could put a couple pieces of tape or something on the end, you know, and build up the end and make your spacing a little bit more forgiving, and that's fine. It's ultimately whatever you want to do. I'd rather sell the mag block that I know works than sell something that might cause issues, and you wouldn't even find out about those issues until you're all the way done with this process, and you're going to test fire it. So that's a little backstory on the Magwell block. Okay, so now we're going to put our receiver pieces in the jig. So we've got our two pieces, our two Magwell pieces. Okay, we've got our center section, and we've got our rear stub. Now there's two issues with this receiver, and part of the reason I chose this receiver is because of those issues. We're gonna need our copper pin to rebuild that selector hole. Okay, it got demolished during torch cut, right? As did the slot on this centerpiece for the fixing plate. But we are going to confidently attempt to re-weld this back together. And I'm gonna bring this a little closer just to show you what I'm doing. All right, so I've got my jig hardware here. This isn't the most ideal place to weld, but this is how I'm doing it. All right, so the first thing is to just kind of roughly line up all your pieces. Oh, I actually just noticed another issue with this receiver. So we are also missing this. Oh, this is backwards. We're missing two receiver holes, actually. We're missing this receiver hole, and then we're missing the selector hole. So this is actually a really good case to document. You get that, honey? Mm-hmm.
Where is it?
Right there.
Yeah.
Thank you. You want to be on YouTube?
No.
Now for this, for the rear stub, I'm actually putting this nut on backwards. So these are just standard flange nuts, but I put the nut on backwards because the flange interferes with the rear receiver stub, and then I just tighten it from this side. But that flange will actually lock, or I'm sorry, the nut, the hex will actually lock against the rear stub. So I put that guy on backwards. Okay. So this is what we've got. All of our jig pieces are installed. I was not able to get a screw through this location. Nothing goes in your selector hole if your selector hole is intact. We're only going to use the copper pin here to rebuild that hole in the event that your receiver looks like this, where it's not, where that hole is not usable. Okay, so we were able to get 4 screws in to locate. We've got the rear stub hole. This one should always be intact. This one, which in my experience is usually intact. This one also usually intact. This goes right behind the inside. You can see it there. And then your front Magwell section, which is, I've never seen these messed up in any way either. So these are the worst case scenario. These are the 4 screw holes that you're going to be able to use for this re-weld. And for the copper pins, we're going to need the 3/16 copper pin, and then we're going to need the 5/16 copper pin for recreating these 2 holes. I guess I've needed a hammer twice for this video already, so I will grab one. Now, when these torch cuts unfortunately intersect these holes, the holes get messed up. So generally, the holes need to be cleaned up in order to pound a pin through it. I've already done that prior to this video. So this is what it looks like with our copper pins in place. One of these pieces, looks like the center piece, is a little bent too. Try to re-bend this guy back into place. I don't know if that was my doing or that's how it was. I have seen these center sections bent before. I mean, it's good enough. It's just a little, it looked like it got pinched. So we are at the point now where we can start welding this back together. Now I'm going to take a pause after I start welding. Once I get all these pieces tacked together and maybe some of these holes reformed, I'm going to take it out of the jig and I'm going to check trigger fitment, the hammer trigger engagement. Normally I'd also check the selector pin, but I don't know if we're going to get there on this video, just because there's so much to rebuild around the selector hole. One thing too is make sure all of your receiver pieces are flat against the bottom of the jig. So see, the rear stub has a little bit of play at this point where it's not tacked together yet. So make sure all the hardware is tight. You know, not over compressing it, but at the same time making sure everything's snug. It's not going to move on you. Just prevent your shrinkage. That's good. Let's pause here. So I started recreating some of these holes. I've got some weld around the copper pins, both of them. Okay. And these copper pins will just hammer right out. You might have to start taking the jig apart just to get everything a little loose. All right, guys, sorry for not showing that last part. The receiver was stuck in the jig a little bit, but this is our tacked receiver. I was able to get some of these holes started. I bridged over the top of both of the selector holes in the back. I bridged over this one. I didn't quite get this one done. But at this point, I like to take the receiver out of the jig and double check that the hammer trigger engagement is what we want. So let's go ahead and grab a hammer and a trigger. So put your hammer in first. Okay. Hammers in. And then this is how I like to put these together. I don't know if this is the way they were intended to be put together or not. But you put the hammer in, you line the spring up with the post on the hammer, okay? And then you rotate your trigger into the pocket. And there's a couple ramps on the receiver. Now these ramps were partially messed up by the torch cutting process, but you actually, I like kind of pull the trigger down onto those ramps and it drops into place, okay? So now let's see if we have a functioning trigger hammer relationship. I might be getting hung up on something. Okay, so we do not have a functioning relationship, but I think I see what's going on. Is the trigger is getting hung up just a little bit on part of this, on the bottom of the receiver where the trigger protrudes through. There's just a little bit of interference. So you can see if I push it forward, but if I pull it back, it gets stuck. So I don't think it's anything we did in the re-weld process. Sometimes like slag and other shit will cause the trigger to not want to rotate, but I don't think it's anything we did. I think it's just a little bit of interference. So let's go ahead and take this out. and we'll file it and see if I'm right. So it was just getting hung up right here, right there. There's just a little bit of a boss protruding there from the torch cutting process. Again, I don't think it's anything we did. And I guess I should rephrase. We did have a functioning relationship with the trigger and the hammer, but it wasn't resetting. You know, and this is a process, guys. I mean, rebuilding these has taught me to be really patient, because a lot of work has to go into these. And, you know, is it worth taking a receiver that's all torch cut up like this to build your own? You know, that's for you to decide. I think, for me at least, you know, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it keeps me doing what I love doing, and at the end of the day, you end up with something that you built. All right, so now let's drop it back in. And it's a bit tricky usually to get these in, but I've said it before, the man that designed these was a genius. So now, when I pull the trigger, it resets on its own. So that tells me that it probably was just a little bit of material on that was interfering with the trigger resetting. So now we have a functioning relationship, and I'm not resetting it on my own. Do it left-handed here. Okay. It picks it up, reset, hammer. So at this point, the jig has really done its job, right? It has set the location of all the pieces. The next thing that you could do, that we won't get into in this video, because this receiver is going to need quite a bit of cleanup, but put this receiver in your upper receiver and check fitment. What we're going to have to do in the next video is clean up the welds that would interfere with the upper receiver. And I do like using my mill for this. Once you clean up the outside of the receiver and make the receiver square on the outside, it's fairly easy to just pop an end mill in there. I like using carbide end mills, and you can clean this up pretty quick. I'll just clean this up in the next video with either the grinder or the sanding wheel. I've got a little bench grinder and a belt sander that I'll clean this up with, and then I'm going to check it with my upper receiver. But the way that it lined up, it looks like this is going to work just fine. So that was pretty much the purpose of this video. Thanks for watching the masterclass for the Vz-61 Skorpion. If you're interested in a jig, please reach out to me. I've got jigs in stock. I try to keep them in stock. This is an example of what you will get. So you will get the jig, you will get the Magwell block, you'll get extra hardware and the copper pins to repair any of those damaged holes. And then all the jigs also come with instructions. So all these instructions talks about, you know, the disclaimer, you know, follow your NFA laws. Do what you have to do to make these semi-auto, if that's your intention, is to build a semi-auto pistol. There's some other parts that also do need to be modified. in order to make these semi-auto. It's not just the receiver. So the selector will also need to be modified. The selector normally has 2 holes. See that? There's 2 holes. There's that hole, and then there's that hole. And one is for semi, one is for full. So you need to weld in one of those holes, and I'll get into that in the next video. You need to weld in one of those holes to make this a semi-auto selector. Basically, it doesn't allow the trigger group to be pulled when it's in that full position. Now, you're still not going to be able to put your full auto sear in the receiver, but without welding that hole closed, still allows the disconnector to be held down if you don't grind off the tang on the disconnector. So that brings me to my next thing. In your trigger pack. Hey guys, sorry, my phone died when I was filming that last section. So we talked about the selector. There's a lug on the hammer. This lug right here also needs to be removed for a semi-auto build. And I'll tell you right now, my receiver, from my full build from Southern Tactical, this does not have the lug on the hammer removed. So I don't know if it's absolutely necessary to remove that lug, but I'm just trying to provide you guys with all the solutions so that you can make a legal semi-auto receiver. But the lug is still there on my Southern Tactical receiver hammer. You know, and maybe it's because, you know, the sear can't be installed in any of these receivers. So, you know, maybe that's enough. But even with that said, you know, I want to provide you guys all the solutions in order for you to create something that you're comfortable building, you know. That the lug on the hammer's only purpose is to engage with the full auto sear, you know. So, you know, they left it. I don't leave it on mine. I don't leave the tang on my trigger packs either. So in the next video, I'll show you removing this tang as well and modifying the selector. You know, that's critical as well. So with all that said, in my instructions, I also go into some detail about how to locate your front 2 pieces first before putting it in the jig. And then, you know, in the next video, you know, we'll go more into finishing this receiver, post-machining it, doing whatever we need to do to, you know, pretty it up, make it look good. But yeah, I think, you know, for the purpose of today's video, we've covered everything that I wanted to cover, and that is using the jig to re-weld these 4 sections back together to create a functional lower receiver that you can drop your parts into. And, you know, the jig really just gives you a good starting place. You know, the purpose of the jig is to not, you know, you don't re-weld the whole receiver in the jig. You know, you certainly can weld within the limitations of the jig, but you're not going to get the whole thing back together. You know, a majority of this receiver is going to be welded outside of the jig. And it will go back in, you know, to finish up some of these hole locations that aren't done yet. You know, we'll use our copper pins to recreate those holes. And, you know, you can also use the holes in the jig to re-drill your holes after the fact as well. So say you just weld in your holes, you know, from the outside, and you need to relocate that hole. You can use the jig to re-drill that hole as well. And that, you know, so the jig can be multi-purpose. So, all right, this video has been pretty long. So thanks for sticking around. And again, if you're interested in a jig, please reach out to me. Thanks for watching. This is Connor at Patriot Fab and Designs. And I will post my email information below so that you can reach out to me if you're interested in one. Thanks again.